Is my microphone on? Yes, it sounds like it. Okay. So I've got these PPK's iPad with giant numbers counting down. So to not break the first rule of Mobilism, which is to finish your presentation late, I'm just going to kick right off to begin with. So this is a presentation with a lot of kind of interesting stuff, but hopefully not things that you've heard before. So we'll start off just by talking about something that we do know, which is the web is about 25 years old. It's a little bit more than 25 now. And when we think about the beginnings of the web, we've got a lot of kind of familiar characters. The first one was, of course, Tim Berners-Lee, who was an Englishman. And so he was English, and he was working at CERN, and he was working with a Belgian computer scientist who helped him revise his initial drafts of his kind of thesis on the web. And they were at CERN, but as Google Maps will show you, they were actually on the French side of CERN. So we have a British person with a Belgian guy living on the French side or working on the French side of the border. They were working on a computer that was built in California. This is where the first web instance was hosted. And then, of course, CERN was in Switzerland. So you had this group of people, some from North America, some from Europe. And if you think about the web, really, that kind of shaped the next little bit of the web, right? So if you think 15 years on from the creation of the web, we were around the year 2000, all these dot.com things were going bust. And the shape of the web, kind of the idea of the web kind of was very much guided by who was on the web. And that was predominantly North America and Europe, really, for the most part. And so mostly North America, Europe, Japan, they were all developed economies. The whole, about 80% of the web users were coming from developed economies at that point. And very much of them were the ones who had kicked the whole thing off. And this basically not only was it users, but it was websites, right? So you look at the Alexa top 10, all the top 10 most favorite and most used sites around the time, they were American, there were some Japanese ones, not so many European ones, but really, again, it's very much, in line with who had kind of started the web. And so if you look into the future, if you look at now, actually the situation is strikingly different, although it's not always immediately apparent given that a lot of the conversation is still centered kind of around Silicon Valley in Europe. But when you really start to look at who is using the web, so what you've got now is a picture that looks like this. So the really high internet penetration is still very much in those countries where everything started. You look at North America, so on the map here, dark red and then kind of the dark orangey color is 60 to 80% and higher web penetration. So you'll obviously see the United States, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands actually is on there, is over 80%. You've got the UK, and then you still have some of those other ones in Asia that kicked it off. So you've got Japan and Korea over on the right. Everybody else is still much, much lower in terms of internet penetration. But then when you start to look at the websites that are being used, you kind of see a different picture starting to emerge, right? So on the Alexa top 20, you now have a sizable number of sites that are actually not North American and they're not European anymore. And not only that, they're coming from emerging economies, so quite a bit from China, from India. And we've got Yandex in Russia as well at the very top, at the very end of the list there in the top 20. So very different kind of audiences. And yet this is still, if you think about it, we still have 3 billion people who have yet to access the internet. And those 3 billion are, for the most part, again, coming from emerging economies. So it starts to kind of reframe who will be using the web in the future. And the reason why this is growing so fast right now, and the reason why we've had this big shift, and a lot of this shift really has happened in the last couple of years, really is mobile. Right? And more specifically, it's devices like this. This is a device out of China. A company that builds it is called Xiaomi. And they're a really interesting company. They've only been around for a few years. And they build devices, really nice Android devices. They've got a customized version of Android. And these devices, they sell really well, but they're really inexpensive. This one here was released about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, and it was about €100. The latest version is below that, and we're seeing Android devices starting to emerge that are actually really quite solid devices in the $50. So I mean, it's starting to get to the point where everyone can afford one, and again, primarily Android. So You've got all these people who are coming online, a lot of people in emerging economies. And what's interesting is that this, these next, not just the next billion, but in some ways the next 3 billion, the internet that they're going to discover isn't exactly the way ours feels, right? There's some sizable differences between the internet that's coming out of other parts of the world and what we've got today. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. And what I'm going to kick off with, here we go, is to talk about sheep. And the reason we're discussing sheep is that in Kuwait, we've got people selling sheep on Instagram. And this is a trend that's developed specifically in Kuwait, not just with sheep, right? This is a magazine article that I've got a couple quotes from, and basically it's a really simple thing. People have lots of Instagram accounts. They take a photo of something, they slap a price tag on it, or they slap a price tag on a thing and then take a photo of it, and they put it on Instagram, and then they sell stuff. And so it's just become something that people do, right? And so this person was saying that even her grandmother has an Instagram business, and she sells dried fruit. So it's just really kind of whatever you have that you might be able to make a little business out of. Got a cousin doing kind of artisanal potted plants things. People are kind of hacking these products together. And to use the word product, it's not a product the way you would think of from a company. It's just you put something together, something somebody might like, or you have a small business, and you sell it whatever way you can, and Instagram's turning out to be really useful. And this is particularly in Kuwait because there's a really large use of Instagram. Why are they fixated on Instagram? It's hard to say. Each country is a little bit different, but this is just it's not something that's only happening in Kuwait. If you take a look over in Thailand, we've got similar things emerging on Facebook. And what all these businesses are kind of doing is they're providing us a glimpse of a new kind of informal economy. And the term informal economy is often used by economists and sociologists and so on to talk about the types of businesses that we've had on this planet for the last couple thousand years, which is just small, often family-owned, informal businesses where a large portion of the population, rather than going to a formal employer and being there for 10 years and so on, they have their own businesses. They run a business for a little while. When it doesn't quite work anymore, maybe they do something else. And so it's kind of this spinning up of kind of ad hoc businesses, except now a lot of them have a digital component and an awful lot of them have a mobile component as well. And what's really important to realize is how ad hoc these things are. This is not Facebook who has created some sort of shopping cart system. There's no plug-in, there's no third-party kind of thing that you hook into to make a shopping cart and all sorts of transactions. This is just somebody who said, okay, I'm going to put stuff on Facebook or Instagram or so on that I want to sell, and I'm going to put some pricing, and I'll provide, in this case, she's got her phone number. She also has some social media account contact numbers, so you can contact her in a bunch of different ways, including, of course, Facebook. And then, she sells stuff and she arranges a transaction with her customers. And so on the one hand, very, very simple, ad hoc, kind of really flexible, do what you can. And then on the other hand, there's a level of sophistication that you might not completely expect. So what you see over on the right there, she's got tracking numbers that she posts whenever she sends stuff out. So, some of these things are being couriered. So you've got this kind of neat mix of new and old and modern, and then slightly more, do what you can with what you've got kind of attitude. And one of the reasons this is happening is that a lot of these services, even though they were designed for something else, they were designed, to be social, to share stuff with people. They're this great kind of middle ground, right? They're not this beautifully crafted Silicon Valley experience of something. Well, they are, but they're of something else. But they create an environment where there's this really nice balance of, really high reach. So in the case of Facebook in Thailand, you've got over 80% of Thai people who are using the internet who are actually on Facebook. So it's kind of a no-brainer in Thailand. If you want to reach internet users, you might as well put things on Facebook. So you've got the reach, you've got the effort, which is relatively low. It's easy to post stuff, easy to get notifications, easy to contact people. It doesn't matter what phone you're using, whether it's something really, really basic or whether it's a computer you have or whatnot. Facebook works everywhere. Functionality is pretty good. You can do a lot of different things. And, so it's really adaptable. You could be running yet another informal type business on the street or in a little shop, and you could actually be running this Facebook business on the side and doing it really efficiently because the platform is good enough. Now, the other thing that it's been doing, specifically in emerging economies, is it's starting to fill these really interesting gaps that we maybe don't have in the West anymore. And as we'll see with Thailand in particular, what they're saying with the Facebook pages is that the largest growth is out in the countryside, right? So you've got people who live in areas that are underserved either by e-commerce, because maybe shipping and things like that aren't as well developed. So the larger merchants will maybe just not offer something in those regions, or the brick and mortar shops, there's just not as much of it out there. So that's where the audience is coming from. So on the one hand, you've got these people who maybe are underserved because they're far away, they're living in the country. And you could think, okay, well, you know, emerging economies, there's a lot of people in the countryside, that's an interesting market right there. But it would be wrong to think that that's the only reason that this is happening, because actually you have the flip side. So here we're going to look at China, and China is just almost the antithesis of everybody else, right? So in China, there are 14 cities with populations over 5 million, which is pretty big, really. I mean, you know, rivals most of parts of Europe. You then have 41 cities. The numbers they're just huge sometimes. 41 cities with more than 2 million inhabitants. And the middle class, you know, and I've kind of got that in quotes because what defines the middle class is kind of changing on a regular basis. But it's growing at a rate of, you know, something like 80,000 people a day. We've got all these people who are basically becoming consumers, so to speak. So, you know, yes, reaching the 600 million rural residents in China is definitely a problem, and it's an opportunity for retailers. But the flip side of that is you have 700 million or more and people coming to the city all the time, and reaching them can be just as hard because there's too many cities, there's too many places to open all these shops. It's almost impossible to actually service not just the people in the country, but in the city. There's just too many opportunities. So for China, for the Chinese shopping online, it isn't so much that it's kind of the alternative electronic version of how they shop. It kind of is commerce to begin with. It's the logical way to do it. And it falls by extension that, you know, using your mobile, again, is not just kind of the modern or new or fancy alternative to using the PC. It's the primary means of accessing not just the internet, but of actually accessing commerce in China for an awful lot of people. So now, if you think about a lot of these things, really, you've got this combination of technology that acts with a combination of kind of demographic factors and economics and things like that. So now you have yet another thing that makes Chinese e-commerce very different, which I'll talk about next. If you look at e-commerce in North America, and certainly Europe is very similar. I mean, in the UK it definitely is, and I think, you know, Germany, Netherlands, and so on, similar as well. A lot of the online retailing involves individual merchants. So you will have a brand like a department store or a well-known large company, and they have their own e-commerce site, and you deal with them directly. You go to H&M's site and you buy things from H&M. In China, it's completely different. 90% of commerce is actually through marketplaces. And the way these marketplaces work, again, they're kind of the digital equivalent of the closest thing that they've had so far, which is kind of the big public market, right? So we've kind of been moving away from these types of marketplaces for almost 100 years now, slowly, sometimes a bit too quickly, but in a lot of emerging economies, this is still how people shop. They go to a market, there's all these little vendors, you can deal with different people, it's a lot more personable. And so what they've done is basically created digital virtual versions of this. And so what you end up with are products such as this. So this is Alibaba. And this specifically is their site called Tmall. Now, Tmall is a giant marketplace full of products. There's more than 180 million customers that access it, and that was actually figures from about a year and a half ago. And there's 150,000 merchants, and Tmall deals specifically with large brands, which is really interesting. It's very different from a lot of what's going on in developed economies. So you have people like, you know, Nestle and, you know, almost any large brand, basically, instead of opening their own shop, they will put their products on Tmall. And because it's major brands, Tmall charges an entry fee and then they charge a commission for each sale. But what the brands get in return is huge opportunity, basically. They get this super high visibility site. You know, everyone in China shops on some of these Alibaba sites. There's 3 or 4 sites. Everybody uses them. It's high visibility, super high traffic, very customizable. You can't really tell from here, but we'll see on some of the other pages. Even though you know, just imagine Amazon. If you're a vendor on Amazon, you can put a little picture, you can put some metadata. That's kind of all you can do. Here, there's actual pieces of software, and there's companies that specialize in nothing but customizing Tmall pages. They make shopping carts, they make carousels, they do all sorts of stuff. So actually what it ends up with is you have a really customized brand experience, kind of the way you might have on your own site, except you have it here. It's mobile optimized, works on any device. There's social networking and social kind of APIs kind of running through the whole thing. So it's a super high visibility, super useful place to be, and it's where everybody converges to shop. And so you even end up with major brands like Apple, who about a year ago, they opened a storefront on Tmall because it's still actually one of the better ways to reach Chinese consumers, and certainly more economical than trying to open a shop in any of those 70 or 80 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants in China. And so that's basically where everybody goes. Now that's big brands, so that's consumers dealing with big brands. You then have an extension of that, which is where it gets even bigger, which is the consumer to consumer side. And this is consumer to consumer, and it's also kind of small micro business to consumer. So it starts to feel a little bit like eBay. This is a site called Taobao. And so there you get lots of small merchants and you get little companies. And not only can they sell things to consumers, but again, this is where it gets even bigger and more interesting. They can also sell services. So this, for example, is a travel agent. You can buy your vacation to Thailand. And if you look at the things that are being sold towards the bottom there, you can buy your airport transportation, you can get your visa, you can get your SIM card in advance so that you've got internet connectivity, and you can even get a MiFi that works specifically in Thailand. Basically, anything you might want for your trip, you can buy online, including the trip itself. So again, we're used to the trip thing. We're not quite so used to all this other stuff. And so what you end up with is this lovely ecosystem that starts to build. It's kind of like Amazon, kind of like eBay, kind of like PayPal, which we're about to talk about in a minute. And then there's a little bit of Google, right? So there's advertising, there's commission sales, there's large marketplaces, and it all works to create this lovely kind of virtuous circle where you have this family of sites that people can go to, and they can engage with things that they might not normally have access to, or just in much easier ways, right? So cars, I mean, all the big car companies that operate in China, from the local ones to the large ones from North America, and people like Volkswagen and Audi and so on, they are actually on Tmall. They have a storefront on Tmall. You can buy the cars online or from your mobile phone. They've got all sorts of specials and things. And you can do, you can buy a Peugeot or you can buy a Lamborghini. I mean, it's not like this is used car sales or things like that. This is basically anything you want to buy is probably on one of these sites. So these sites just basically dominate the public consciousness in such a way that everyone is participating. So you get this informal businesses that kind of spring up. This is a quote from an article I found a while ago where it says basically, it's such a success that running a Taobao shop, it's kind of a national pastime. It's like a second job or a hobby for people. And, reading some of the testimonials and people talking about why they have shops, a lot of times, they live in one of these gigantic Chinese cities. Chances are, if there's 14 million people in this city, they probably live in the suburbs. They have a long commute. They spend a lot of time on the bus or the subway or something. They come back. They probably have a fairly small apartment. And so this is just an extra fun thing to do. You've got extra income. You can sit there on the bus and you can chat with people who are trying to buy your products, convince them that your price is better than somebody else. There's a lot of social aspects to it. And then, you get to start small businesses. And some of these small businesses inevitably evolve into actual formal businesses that people continue with. And that's what's proving to be really interesting. So what's happening in particular in the countryside, in the city, a lot of people probably still do have something approaching a traditional job. But in the countryside, what is creating is this whole groundswell of small businesses that are propping up where they have products, whether it's agricultural products, whether it's things like handicrafts or furniture or whatnot. They might have a small workshop. And now they just put all this stuff on usually Taobao if it's small companies. And they can sell these products to thousands of consumers. You've got organic vegetables being sold over the internet through things like Taobao. And then they start to aggregate sometimes and they build a slightly larger enterprise. Then they go on to Tmall where they have even more exposure and they're considered to be more of an official business. And so it's producing tons and tons of revenue for people. And as an example, this is 2012, so it's already a couple years ago, we had about a million of these little shops that were registered in rural areas. These are businesses that probably wouldn't really have existed if not for this, and in many cases, if not for mobile, because a lot of this is being accessed through mobile. And just again, looking at the size of it, you've got about half of all the parcel deliveries in China that just go through Tmall, or that are just for Tmall and Taobao, let alone everybody else. So it's got these industries that are springing up, but entirely to service digital. Whereas in our case, in the West, all these industries sprung up over the last 100 years to service brick and mortar shops. So it's creating completely different ecosystems. So we've talked about China. Now, this isn't only going on in China, which is kind of the interesting bit as well. And if you think about it, it makes sense because other emerging economies have very similar problems. So this is Jumia, a company out of Africa, and it's actually created by Europeans, this one, but it's they have products all throughout Africa. And they have similar problems, right? They say almost everyone has a mobile phone, especially because these companies support the cheapest mobile phone possible all the way to the most expensive. So you have 3 malls per 20 million inhabitants. Why not go mobile? It's the right time to completely leapfrog over the idea of going offline at all. Just build the whole ecosystem mobile to start and digital to start. And then the other stuff can come later, if it even does, which is an interesting question. So, to keep adding lots of little bits to this story, all this stuff is happening, what we'll call over there, but it is starting to kind of cross-pollinate, which is also really, really interesting. So this is from a video, an Alibaba promotional video that's on YouTube. They've got a whole bunch of these to try to show actually Western consumers why it might be interesting actually to start engaging with these big these big marketplaces in Asia. So this is a lady in California. She has a business on Etsy. So she sells cake and cake decorating things for children's birthday parties. Basically, you get this little kit and you can make cupcakes and you can put little flowers on them and you've got little cups to put them in that are multicolored. She gets all of her supplies off the internet from Alibaba, deals directly with factories and companies in China. And so she gets all this interesting stuff that she might not have available in North America, and she can choose from a much larger range. But her business mostly is selling to North Americans. So you get this interesting cross-pollination. Now, you can kind of go in the other direction as well. This is, again, from Etsy, but this is actually a Chinese family near the Pearl River Delta. It's a family business of about 5 people. So there's one designer, there's a couple tailors, there's somebody who does a bit of marketing. They obviously have a really nice photographer working with them. And they design clothes, they put them on Etsy, and then consumers from around the world will send in their measurements, and they will just custom build the piece of clothing for the person and send it off. And so, it's not just something that's happening, again, over there, so to speak. There's this interesting mingling that's starting to happen. And a lot of it just simply has to do with the fact that the world is now so global in many ways, or at least so accessibly global. It's really easy for people to find out what's going on in other places. And so, even consumers in China, a lot of Western brands are just starting to wake up to the fact that there's places like Tmall and Alibaba where they can put things. Again, with Apple, it was last year that they opened a store. Ironically, I think Amazon actually opened a store on Tmall last week, which was an interesting move. So there's an awful lot of brands who aren't yet really dealing with China, but the appetite for their products is already there. And there's an awful lot of people who are kind of working in Asia. What they do basically is they bring in products from the West and then they sell them on these marketplaces, not always with the knowledge of the brand owner, right? So that there are quite a few stories of, if you think your stuff isn't being sold in China yet, just go and have a look on Alibaba somewhere. It's probably there. You just don't know it's there. Someone sent it over. And so especially when you look at people in these emerging economies, it's creating this really neat kind of new generation of, it's a group that's really highly globalized, that's digital first, and needless to say, obviously mobile first. And, consumers who live in one region, but they actively shop and seek out and are engaging with things that are happening in other parts of the world. And in some ways, we're kind of coming at it from the other side. We're not necessarily as good. I love Chinese media. I love Japanese pop songs. I love all sorts of stuff out of Asia that I have a really hard time finding. I think, ironically, people on the other side of the world have it easy because they've got their own big, giant regional marketplaces that cross-pollinate really well. And then they also can see all the stuff going on in the West because we started it and we're a lot louder sometimes. So they kind of have access to it all. We're a little bit behind. However, these marketplaces are awesome, but when you start to deal with the marketplace idea, kind of like the App Store idea, you get into the problem of too many things in the store and no one can find anything. So how do people find things? How do they know what's good? And so there's various things that are emerging. And this is a little case study that I found from a company in Beijing who helps marketers understand how to engage people from various demographics. So they had this little profile of this girl named Jing. So she's an affluent young Chinese girl. She started blogging about her life, and she likes to blog about fashion when she was studying abroad in the UK. And their little message to brands was that, if you're a brand and you're trying to get into the Chinese market, she is now your competition. Because really, she's also a marketer. She has a Weibo microblog, which is basically the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, but it does a lot more. Has about 28,000 followers, which is actually pretty conservative. But she also has a blog. She has all sorts of other social media outlets, and she blogs about her life and fashion tips and so on. And then she's also a retailer. She has products that are produced probably by dealing with people like Alibaba, where she finds companies and manufacturing facilities who can make stuff for her. And she offers copies of some of the stuff that she's photographed herself wearing, some of the products she's found abroad. And she has these kind of limited edition sales, and it usually takes her just a couple hours to sell out, right? So she's kind of got her own kind of fashion brand. And she operates the whole thing through a combination of social media and then sites such as Taobao. Taobao is a transaction engine. Social media is what brings a lot of the customers and the interest in. It's how she propagates her brand. And, and this is just a teenager, right? I mean, this is not a major brand. And so you're starting to get this kind of curation that's coming to help people understand what's going on. Now, obviously, she takes her thing very seriously from the looks of it. I mean, she's got products she's actually selling. Now, there's obviously a lot of other people who might have things that they want to share. They have things that they like. They might want to kind of curate lists of things they like, the way you would do, for example, on Pinterest, or even people on Twitter and so on. I mean, a lot of social interaction is very much curation of, hey, these are the things I like, and I'll tell my friends about it. So what's starting to emerge is something that's been kind of dubbed an online shopping neighborhood. And what these things are, they look very much like Pinterest, but they're much, much, much more than that. They're they're a destination site. They're created and kind of fueled by social media. And consumers can go and they can explore lists of curated choices about different things. This one happens to be a fashion one, but there's other ones as well. So as an example, this is one of the largest ones, got about 32 million users, really nice mobile. Again, all of this is mobile optimized as well as desktop. These are some desktop screenshots, but really there's mobile for all of this. It's just a given. It will always be there. And this particular site is one of the ones that's doing really, really well. And to understand, again, how this works and why this is also very different from something like Pinterest is people collect things, they put them there, consumers come and look at them, they like them. But then, if they click on them, they can go and buy them. And that's the bit that's missing, again, in things like Pinterest right now, is there's no transactional model necessarily. And so this site, Meilish, I probably absolutely butcher the way it's pronounced, it has 5 to 6 million clicks every day for online merchants, basically people finding things they like, clicking, and then going outbound to the website where you can buy it. Now, that website could be Taobao, it could be almost anything. And the company gets a cut for every outbound link. So it's like one of those online shopping travel comparison sites where if you look for a flight and then you click and you go purchase it on KLM, the company that you use to find the site will get, 50p or some amount for it. And so it's the same thing, but we've got huge numbers of transactions, millions a day, and generating huge amounts of business on the other end for all these consumers. And this was just one site, and this one was just about fashion, and it mostly is kind of girly fashion for a certain age group. There are many others. And so it's one model that's emerging in terms of kind of curating things and helping people find what they want. Now, one of the reasons this works really well in Asia, in a lot of emerging economies, it's not just Asia at all, it's emerging economies in particular, is using social to kind of fuel all of this is working particularly well, because what's starting to happen, and mobile I think has a lot to do with it, because again, we all have this thing in our pocket, it's always on, it's connected, all these social sites work really, really well on mobile devices. So the difference between Europe and North America, for example, if you look at this vaguely confusing diagram, so top right is kind of us, right? So we've got the UK, the US, France, Germany, Italy, Australia. You've got all the developed economies that started a long time ago. And again, South Korea and Japan that we saw at the beginning. These are the people who got on the internet many years ago already, have really high internet penetration. And so the penetration of internet usage is high. And then if you look at the other axis, the use of social media is actually pretty high as well, although it varies, right? But then you look on the other side and you've got all these countries where almost no one is online yet. And yet everyone's using social media. In some cases, there's more people using social media, but you only might have 20 or 30% of people online at all. So what's starting to happen, and people are realizing, is that as soon as somebody gets online, they are now on social media. Whereas ironically, still in Europe and so on, we still have to convince people. Sometimes we have to tell our grandparents maybe they might want a Facebook account. In a lot of these emerging economies, as soon as someone gets a mobile phone, the first thing they do is they put Facebook or WeChat or whatever the local variant is on it. Matter of fact, sometimes they will walk into a shop and say, I want Facebook or I want WeChat, and that's their entry point. I've seen that actually in shops. We were in Thailand a while ago, and somebody came in and they purchased a phone, and they sat down with the vendor for about 10 minutes while he installed all these social apps for them and helped them configure it so they could walk out with everything already ready. And that's the big selling point for a lot of people. And so social is really fueling a lot of this. In China in particular, it is huge. I mean, this is the social ecosystem in China. Whereas, again, we're used to things like Facebook, and then on Facebook you can do a variety of things. In China, there are social kind of slices for almost everything you might want to do. And then there's still also the big ones that everyone goes to. So there's just so many more ways that it kind of gets curated down, and it helps people find things, and it gets a lot closer to what people are looking for. So the other thing that happens, and you're probably starting to see this trend here, I mean, nothing in China ever just starts as one thing. It just kind of mushrooms into bigger and bigger. And it's always, what can we do that's better with what we've got? So they're not just social sites, they're actually proper platforms. And, Facebook just a few days ago announced they were going to start some transactional stuff, and there's going to be Facebook for business and so on. A lot of what they're doing is, let's face it, directly modeled after what's already been going on specifically in China for at least 3 or 4 years. One of the kind of poster child examples is WeChat. And WeChat is about 4 years old, so not old at all. It has 500 million users every month, and it is entirely mobile. There's no desktop anything for this. It is just mobile. It started mobile, and it's still mobile only. And it has become so popular that it's starting to kind of overwhelm everything else in China. This was a quote from, I don't know if any of you have heard of this gentleman. His name is Hugo Barra. He was head VP of Android initially, and he left Google, and he now runs Xiaomi, who's that manufacturer that had the lovely phones I showed at the beginning. And so he's from California, but he's been living in China for a few years now, and he's just, he's always overwhelmed by how much WeChat is used. It's like everyone I know, that's all they use, right? Everyone's on WeChat. They don't use email. They don't use the phone. They don't use SMS. Everyone communicates through WeChat. And part of the reason is that this is an absolute powerhouse app. I mean, it does everything, and yet it does it well enough that it hasn't turned into this overwhelming mess, which does tend to sometimes happen. So the stuff up at the top we're kind of used to, right? So text chatting and maybe doing group chats or video chats. Okay, that sounds pretty normal. We've got kind of photo blogging and so on. The bit at the bottom, though, is where it gets really interesting and why it's grown so fast, which is the API, the payment platform, and the virtual wallet. And that's been in there for quite a while now. So WeChat has an extensive API, and it basically has almost the internet inside of WeChat, which, again, is a bit of a problem for a variety of reasons, but is working ridiculously well. So just to get an idea of what you're looking at here, so on the left, there's brands that I had subscribed to. So you follow them. And once you followed them, you get the bit in the middle shows you, for example, one of these brands, their little homepage, so to speak. At the very bottom, where you've got this little drop-down or pull-up menus. Basically what they've got is it's almost like a mini website inside of WeChat. And again, these things are customizable. There's an API. It's not as customizable, for example, as a Tmall shop, which can be really customized, but you can do an awful lot in there. You can set up all sorts of services. You can have different pages that have different information. And what you also have that people use an awful lot is this kind of chat interface on the side here. And it's kind of a mixture of live chat and then kind of like the automatic voice recognition when you speak into a phone and you input something and then it sends something back to you. So with Starbucks there, for example, I input the word coffee, and then it sent me back a whole bunch of stuff that I couldn't read. And then I input the word cappuccino, and then it sent me something that had a coupon on it. So, you can get information about products. You can find out the opening hours. You can get all sorts of information. A lot of customer service is now taking place here. Rather than calling, you just go into WeChat and you start texting with somebody live. There's so much you can do. And it's got full-blown transactions, so you can actually make purchases right in there of things. So, for example, I could probably click that cappuccino thing automatically goes to my virtual wallet and I've purchased something. And then when I go to the store, I just show them a QR code and I get my coffee. So there's lots and lots of stuff going on where this is basically turning into a proper platform. And the number of people who are using the virtual wallet is just growing and growing. And they're being hugely proactive about it. They've got these contests and things all the time to get people to put their bank account information into this app. And once it's in there, then people start using it. Now, there's no kind of one web thing going on here at all. I mean, again, it is a walled garden. It's a platform. Inside of it, there's like a whole other internet. What is interesting, though, is that this is still greatly under development. There's a lot of stuff going on. We still don't really know which way it's going to go. And one of the very nice things that's emerged lately, it's kind of almost the antithesis of the whole thing, is that there's a new kind of trend called light apps. And so these are mobile-only mobile web apps. Basically, they're almost entirely JavaScript, but they're entirely mobile web, and they're entirely mobile. So there's no desktop. If you try to view them on the desktop, you get this giant stretched pixelated thing a lot of times, or you can't get to it at all. So they've basically said, we know our audience is mobile, that's it. And we know that WeChat is mobile. And so what these things are is a lot of times they're entry points into WeChat. So you'll see a campaign somewhere, you might see a poster, you might scan a QR code, you get to one of these sites. They're beautifully designed, they have music, they have animation, like JavaScript, HTML, basically whatever latest standards they can pack into, as long as it works inside of WeChat, because a lot of times it goes inbound into WeChat, so they have to make sure it works with basically the web view that's inside of WeChat. And then from there, there's always a call to action that usually brings you into WeChat to do something, to buy something, or so on. So it's an interesting mix, because on the one hand, it's a very closed platform that everyone is pouring into, but a lot of times their entry point is something that's just so completely mobile and web. It's just the desktop is nowhere to be found at all, which is fascinating. So why is all this happening over there? So a lot of the reason why virtual wallets and all of this transaction, again, in the West, a lot of times we're umming and ahhing, should we put a virtual wallet or something into Facebook? I don't know, maybe it won't work. Over there, it's just kind of a no-brainer, because you have huge amounts of the population that aren't using financial services formally anyways, right? You've got, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's about a quarter of people who have no formal relationship with a bank. In Indonesia, there's only 15% of people who have credit cards. How do you do e-commerce without credit cards, right? So you find another way. So there's tons of things that have emerged, a lot of them around mobile, and many of you have probably heard about M-Pesa in Africa, where, and this is almost 6 or 7 years old now, where with even the tiniest, most horrible phone, you can send payments, you can receive payments, you can have transactions entirely through your phone. It's been going on for a while now. So a lot of people pay through their device. E-commerce is also, in a lot of cases, uses a lot of cash on delivery. This still is a huge thing, so it totally changes the e-commerce kind of paradigm around, because people buy things temporarily and then they don't really pay for them until they arrive at their door. And it's creating also a lot of interesting problems, because let's say you've got this giant marketplace, you have all these vendors, you don't always know if you can trust people. The vendor isn't even going to get the payment until the person actually arrives and opens the package at the door. So you've got this completely different chain of trust than we have, where everyone's paying in advance. So what do? Right? So you plug the gap, and they're coming up with lots of really interesting ideas to how do you plug all these gaps. So in the case of Alibaba, they have a whole financial arm, and the financial arm called Alipay, it acts as an escrow service. So if I purchase something from a vendor, that vendor will not get the money until I've received the package and I've said it's okay. And Alibaba holds the money, and then it kind of mediates if there's any problems. So it creates this kind of area of trust where there might not otherwise be. And the thing with all of these services is, once they exist, as we saw with the example at the beginning, people find Facebook and they're like, oh, I'll go and use it for something else. As soon as these services exist, people find ways to use it for something else. So Alipay, which started just as a transactional escrow thing, there's now 800 million users. People are using it to pay for all sorts of other stuff, school fees. You can get loans, you can pay your mobile phone bill, you can pay your hospital charges. It's turned into a whole other way to pay for things. And technically, it's just something that emerged on the web. What's also happening is that people are coming up with wacky ways to use all these payment services, right? So this is an example called YY out of China. It has about 300 million users. And you can kind of think of it as Google Hangouts, but with payment services, because everything has payment services. So what you do is you subscribe to all these channels. This girl does karaoke, she sings, she does kind of talk radio and so on. And as she's talking, people can send her little gifts in the shape of little flowers and lollipops and things. These things cost pennies, they cost almost nothing, so people just send them. But the audience is so huge, even pennies, when you've got 800 million people or something, you end up with situations like this, where you've got these guys who are giving Photoshop lessons, and they're earning, $20,000 a month giving Photoshop lessons throughout this site. There's people doing karaoke, earning large amounts of money. And it's not just China, again. So, it would be a mistake to think that China's the only country that does all this stuff. Korea has something similar. Apparently, this guy has a wonderful time every night, singing and dancing and eating noodles in front of people, and they send him money. There's audiences for almost everything. And as soon as you have transaction models attached to them, and we're really struggling with this in the West in a lot of cases, there's no transaction models for a lot of stuff. And here you can do almost anything, and there's some way to get paid for it. And all of this is entirely fueled by mobile, right? If mobile is the glue, a lot of these services, it relies on the fact that you could access them at any time. You've got your video camera there, your phone, your everything that you need. And in a lot of cases, QR codes specifically are what tie it together, because that's how you get from the phone sometimes to the other thing, or from the other thing to the phone. So there's this acceptance that, the phone is the beginning, but sometimes it's also the end. And so WeChat is a really nice example. Everything with WeChat is QR code based. So when you open an account on WeChat, the very first thing you do is you get a QR code. And then anytime, if you were at this conference, for example, you all had WeChat accounts, you could just all scan each other's QR codes and just follow each other. There's no typing. There's no, typing is old-fashioned. Everything is done through QR codes. And so initially you might say, okay, well, I don't have a QR code reader. Well, in China, that's not really a problem. Everyone's got one. It's in your browser. It's in your travel app. It's in Tmall. It's in WeChat. There are QR code readers in almost every app. So you will never not have a QR code reader. That's not usually the problem. The problem is just wanting to use it. And there's so many ways to use it. So using QR codes to interact and actually transact, it's become completely commonplace. It's almost mundane. People don't really think about it at all. And so what's happening is we're getting to this really interesting point where they've built up this massive ecosystem, online, digital, virtual, mobile. And they're still doing the brick and mortar stuff, though, right? They are still building stores in China and Africa. It is still going to happen, but now they're going to start to bring them together. So there's a lot of partnerships starting to form between people like Alibaba with the department stores that do still exist, to say, okay, how can we just mix it up? So you can go to the department store, scan a QR code, and then we'll just ship you the package and you'll have it at home, right? So you're bringing the transactions together. Or you buy it online. If you don't like it, you can just return it to any of hundreds of different stores. Lots and lots of different ways of doing it. So they're not just leapfrogging desktop, they're not just leapfrogging finance, and physical retail. It's almost like they live in this giant, very rapid prototype, because there are so many transactions, there's so many things going on. If you look at the difference between 25 billion mobile transactions for PayPal and 150 billion for Alipay, how much more experimentation can you have when there's those large numbers? It makes it so much easier to roll out a service and just say, and actually get enough scale to decide whether it's properly working. And all these consumers, they live in a world where, is it online, is it offline, is it mobile? In some ways, it becomes irrelevant. Everything is everything and nothing. And you start to basically, they don't have the baggage that we have. They don't have to worry about what's normal, because normal is always changing. They don't have all the legacy worries. And so there's lots of experimentation. So I'll leave you with one more really quick example. This is a company called LaMotta that operates in Russia. And in Russia, the problem is poor postal infrastructure. You can't get things anywhere fast. And so what they decided to do is like, okay, well, what do? We've got lots of people who want to buy things online, but we can't get them to them in a really reliable way. So what they do is they have sales associates who are actually delivery people as well. And they come directly to the house. They give you the package. A lot of people are paying cash on delivery anyways, because also there's issues with credit card fraud and so on. So cash on delivery is still popular. So they bring the clothes, you open them, you can actually try them on. You pay for them if you like them. And then on top of that, because these people are also sales associates, they bring a few extra things and they try to upsell you to other things. And so on the one hand, it's completely crazy. How could this possibly work? But, you know, they're trying it because they can and because right now it solves a problem. And I'm sure it won't work 100%, but they'll take the bits that work and then they kind of, you know, they roll it into something else. So throughout Asia, you're seeing lots and lots of these examples. You know, in Korea, you can scan things. This is the subway in Korea, and you can scan QR codes. By the time you get home for dinner, these things have been delivered to your house, right? Again, ways to do things really quickly. In China, this is a subsidiary of Walmart, of all things. And in China, they've launched virtual stores. Basically, they've put these virtual, kind of like these geocaches that are actually virtual stores in all these popular places. So if you're in a tourist attraction, you can step in, and now you're actually in a store if you've got your app, and you can buy things. And if you step out, you're not in the store anymore. So it's a complete gimmick, but it gets people thinking of, okay, well, does a store have to have a physical location? Could we just know that there's a store on that corner all the time? You know, why not? How could we start to play around with things? And, you know, poor Amazon is still trying to test their drone deliveries, and they're having so much trouble getting approval in North America to even test like last year's drone, let alone this year's drone. And in a lot of other countries, they're just starting to say, okay, well, look, our road systems are terrible. Why don't we just do everything by drone? I mean, on the one hand, it's crazy. On the other hand, it just might work. And there's not the barriers because they have to try stuff because they're building everything fresh anyways. So, and then you start to combine some of these ideas and you really have something, right? What if the drones then brought things that you could upsell? And what if you could pay the drone? I mean, there's lots of things you can do, right? But you just have to have the ability to experiment. So mobile and the internet have already changed our lives beyond recognition, right? We really don't know what's going to happen next in many ways. But what we do know is that the opportunities, they're going to be more global than we've ever really expected. And so to meet all these challenges and to compete in these giant marketplaces, the thing that we should always remember is that what seems futuristic to us might merely feel kind of just new and practical to other people. And I'll leave you with this really awesome quote from The Economist, which is, to Westerners, mobile banking is a new way to do something old, but to many Africans, it's the obvious way to do something new. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Thank you. Can you join
Do we have time?
me? Yeah, we have time.
Okay.
We have time.
Okay.
I was told that we don't have to worry too much about time today.
Time is immaterial.
Because it's the last time. And plus PPK has to hook up his laptop. So I've got some questions here, which is great. Compare WeChat with AOL.
Oh, it's a terrible question because I barely ever used AOL. I mean, okay,
You don't get the book, whoever asked that. Yeah. That's a terrible question.
No, it's not a terrible question. Okay, I'm going to assume you meant from a walled garden perspective because
Yes.
I don't know what AOL did that was, I mean, it was so long ago, it couldn't possibly have been that similar, I think. I mean, they were both walled gardens. They both are walled. I mean, this is a thing that's becoming interesting. There's more walled gardens going up all the time as the web is also growing. The walled gardens are sometimes way more useful, unfortunately, and I think that's a big challenge, right? I mean, they can iterate so fast. They can build in all this transaction models, all these things, and meanwhile, we're still trying to get Flexbox working, and that's what it is, right? And so I think it's going to be really interesting. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think experimentation is good. So I think that's the one thing about the walled gardens is sometimes they show overwhelmingly that we actually need something, right? And then once we know we really need it, then we'll eventually get it working on the web as well.
Right. Okay. So
I don't know.
Do you see, like in Asia, do you see kind of a trend toward a non-text kind of web experience with sound, video?
Yes.
They're tending to avoid a lot of text.
I mean, a lot of Asian countries, not all of them, but enough of them also have a text input problem because you're dealing with sets of 2,000 characters to choose from. So WeChat, actually, one of the things you can do is you speak into it, and then it just translates it. It does, it kind of, you can do an entirely text chat. So you speak, it translates, it sends the text, person speaks back. So there's a lot of stuff that's being kind of in some ways, why type? Why type if you can do something else? So Baidu, the biggest search engine in China, has a huge AI division right now that's trying to sort out image recognition like really well, so that they can start doing a lot of this stuff through image recognition. I mean, basically anything that, because everyone's on mobile, again, the incentive between typing that's sometimes a bit harder and everyone being on mobile where no one wants to type anyways, any other input method is up for use, really. And yeah, you are seeing things like video being used a lot more. Just basically things that are native to the device in some ways, right? Like it's kind of like, how can we use every single capability on the device to do something neat or do something better?
So how does that translate to cost? I mean, data. So everyone's on mobile. Is it a lot cheaper, or what?
It varies. It varies. I mean, cost is still a problem in a lot of countries. And now again, we get back to the walled garden issue. So, for example, Facebook is offering free data connectivity if you use their app in a lot of countries. So you have not only have a walled garden, you have a walled network around Facebook. That's happening more and more. I think Google has maybe started doing it in certain places as well. So that's one of the things that these platforms have the power to do, is because they're so big, they can negotiate with operators and say, look, if you're within our system or within our little ecosystem, you don't have to pay for data, and it gets an awful lot more people in. And a matter of fact, there was a report just a few weeks ago, I think it was Twitter who had done the research, I forget who it was exactly, but that there's parts of Asia where it's not uncommon for people to not realize they're using the internet at all. They think Facebook is the internet. They've had quite a few people spit that back to them, where they say to them, are you using the internet? And people say no. And then they say, are you using Facebook? And people say yes. And there isn't this understanding that, that they don't know that Facebook isn't the internet, or they don't know the internet is, or Facebook is on the internet. It's Facebook, right? We use Facebook.
It's like all my American friends.
Yeah. Okay. They
don't realize there's anything outside of Facebook. So
but
they'll never see this. So.
But if Facebook pays for all your data, as long as you're on Facebook, then it's really easy to see how that develops, right? And so with Google starting to offer, I mean, they're working on their Project Loon, the balloons and stuff are coming along quite well. I mean, you can start to see how I think big brands will start to try to subsidize data a lot more until it evens itself out and gets cheaper for people.
I think you gave the longest answer to that one, so that might possibly be the best question.
Okay.
Do they deserve the book, you think? Who asked that question?
Yes.
Yarno.
I don't know what's next, but yes.
So you just find me and you'll get your book later on. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
It was a great talk and a great start to the last Mobilism.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.